She happy. And got money, because I'm going to make sure of that. So what's the problem with you and me?
Somewhere between the altar and the airport, something went very wrong. Toni Braxton said I do on August 8th, 2024. 48 hours later, she was gone, and not quietly. She filed for divorce, listed their official separation date as August 10th, and walked away from a marriage that had barely had time to breathe. 2 days, not 2 months, not 2 years, 2 days.
I'll tell you a crazy story. I have a neighbor, very successful. So he wakes me up, says, yo, come over to my house, we having a celebration. He had just sold his company for like 400 million. Everybody knew, it was everywhere. And his wife does the ding, 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 ding with the cup. And she gives the most beautiful speech. I love this man. This man's the greatest ever. 7 in the morning on Instagram, the wife files for divorce.
Yo. The next day.
Premeditated murder.
Is there a story behind Man Enough for Me for you?
Maybe.
Really?
Maybe.
Because you've told some great stories about songs.
Yeah, maybe. It was this guy I was dating, and this is the same guy who told me that Jesus told him that we should break up. And I'm like, well, that's gossiping, because I know Jesus too. He told you something he didn't tell me? What do you mean Jesus told you to break up with me? That was...
And according to Birdman, who is no longer keeping quiet about any of it, what Toni was walking away with was not just her dignity. She was allegedly walking away with a demand for $160 million, a number that happens to match Birdman's estimated net worth almost exactly, down to the dollar. That is not a coincidence that is easy to explain away.
Just bring it on. Your family, bring it on. Just go ahead.
Okay. Are you married?
I am.
Okay. Explain that to us, because
You know what?
you were married, then you weren't married.
I heard a lot of different rumors.
Yes.
I heard that I'm getting 100 and, what is it, the amount?
A lot.
I heard
You're
that
getting
too.
a big check from a certain former producer who's dropping off a bunch of money.
I heard that too.
And the more details that surface about the full arc of Toni and Birdman's relationship, the on-again, off-again years, the $5 million engagement ring that mysteriously disappeared, the pattern of financial crisis that has followed Toni across 3 decades, the harder it becomes to read this as a love story that simply did not work out. Birdman is now saying it was never a love story at all, that he got played. That Toni ran a game on him so smooth and so patient that by the time he understood what was happening, the ring was allegedly gone and the divorce papers were already drafted. The story of how we got here starts well before the 2024 wedding. It starts in 2016 when Toni and Birdman first went public with their relationship after years of friendship. They had known each other for over 2 decades, since before her kids, before his empire, back when they were just running in overlapping circles. The foundation felt real. The slow build felt earned. And when Birdman proposed in 2018 with a $5 million yellow diamond ring, flashy, enormous, impossible to miss, it looked like a genuine fairy tale arriving at exactly the right moment for both of them.
We've been friends forever, for 25 years.
Yeah.
Before I had my kids, we were just buddies, like nothing, like romance from friendship.
Really?
From friendship, yeah.
So you were just celebrating, though, weren't you?
Yeah, just a year.
A year.
A year.
How is that going? And by the way, you all do a great job of kind of keeping it out of the
Well, we didn't
spotlight.
want people to know.
Why not?
Because of what happened.
But then the wedding kept getting pushed. Dates were floated and quietly dropped. Explanations were vague. Toni cited timing, circumstances, reasons that never quite added up to a satisfying answer. Fans who had been rooting for them started noticing that the engagement felt more like a headline than a commitment, a piece of content rather than a plan. And then came the ring. Toni claimed she lost it, left it on a flight, she said. The bag came back. The ring did not. A $5 million diamond simply ceased to exist somewhere between point A and point B. And the explanation offered for its disappearance was that it had been misplaced like a phone charger. The streets were not buying it then, and they are not buying it now. Because the version of events that has been circulating with increasing credibility is that Toni did not lose that ring. She sold it, allegedly pawned it to cover debts that were pressing enough to require that specific solution. And Birdman, who initially played it cool in interviews and brushed the whole thing off as an accident, eventually connected the dots. When he did, according to insiders, the trust between them collapsed so completely that no amount of time or conversation could rebuild it. The engagement was officially over. The relationship fell apart. And for 4 years, both of them moved separately. Toni insisting publicly that she was done, that the chapter was closed, that whatever they had belonged to a version of her life she was no longer living. Until 2023, when she apparently changed her mind.
I'm so happy at this point in my life. I mean, some of the aches and pains, like, ooh, that's not lupus, that's just being older.
Do you also think that's because of your love life?
That could
It's
be,
settled?
but I like to think me just being a woman and comfortable in being a woman. It's up being a woman sometimes.
Right.
Having to fight for things.
The reconciliation did not make sense to anyone watching from the outside. Toni had been clear about her position for years. She had that specific energy in interviews, the unbothered diva who has moved past something and wants everyone to know it. When she was asked about Birdman in public settings, the body language shifted. The tone cooled. She deflected with the grace of someone who has rehearsed not caring. And then, without any visible explanation, she started circling back. Birdman says she came to him, that she was sending signals, staying in his orbit, making it clear she wanted another chance. He says he resisted at first, that he had moved on and was not looking to revisit something that had already cost him. But the history between them was long, and the emotions were real, and eventually, he let her back in. One thing led to another, and on August 8, 2024, they got married, which makes what happened next. The 2-day marriage, the immediate filing, the $160 million demand, not just a breakup, but a betrayal of the highest order if Birdman's read of the situation is accurate. Because the math on this does not behave like a failed romance. It behaves like a strategy. To understand why Birdman's version of events has the traction it has, why people are nodding rather than laughing when he says he got played, you have to understand the financial reality that Toni Braxton has been living inside for the better part of 3 decades. Because this is not a woman who stumbled into one bad deal. This is a pattern so consistent, so recurring, so resistant to intervention, that at some point it stops looking like bad luck and starts looking like a structural problem with no clear resolution. Toni Braxton in the 1990s was one of the defining voices of that decade. Platinum albums, sold-out arenas, Grammy Awards, a cultural footprint that reached everywhere American R&B reached. She was not just successful, she was the standard against which other artists in her lane were measured. And yet, in 1998, she filed for bankruptcy. The headlines were brutal. The public confusion was genuine. How does someone who has sold millions of records, who has been performing at the highest level of the industry for years, end up unable to pay her debts? The answer was complicated and uncomfortable. There were industry contracts that paid her far less than her commercial success warranted. There were spending habits that reflected the lifestyle her image required, rather than the income her deals actually generated. There were structural imbalances between what she was producing for the label and what the label was giving back to her. She went on Oprah to explain herself, and the interview turned into something she clearly had not prepared for. Oprah did not ask softball questions. She pressed. She questioned the spending. She pushed on the decisions. And Toni, rather than sitting in the discomfort of accountability, pushed back, called it mean, positioned herself as a victim of the questioning, rather than an adult being asked reasonable questions about choices she had made. That Oprah moment was revealing in ways that went beyond the bankruptcy itself, because it showed a version of Toni that the public did not usually get to see. The version that deflects when pressed, that reaches for victimhood when accountability is the more appropriate response, that maintains the image of grace and class right up until the moment the image becomes inconvenient. She recovered, or appeared to recover. By the mid-2000s, she was back with new music and new momentum, and the story of her financial collapse had been reframed as a chapter she had survived and moved past. But 2010 arrived, and the second bankruptcy followed. This time, the numbers were staggering. She claimed debts between $10 million and $50 million. There were complications from her health, real and documented struggles with lupus that disrupted her ability to work and tour consistently. There were canceled shows and insurance disputes and lawsuits stacking up from every direction. The health crisis was genuine. But the financial crisis had roots that predated the diagnosis and pointed at patterns that health alone could not fully explain. Since then, the trajectory has been difficult to watch. Her album sales have cratered to numbers that would be alarming for a mid-tier artist, let alone someone with her legacy. Her last release peaked at number 163 on the Billboard 200 and sold fewer than 7,000 copies. The one before it moved around 16,000. For a woman who once had albums go multi-platinum, these numbers represent a commercial freefall that has fundamentally altered what her income looks like on a monthly basis. The shift to reality television through Braxton Family Values bought her time and visibility, but not financial stability in any durable sense. And as the show's cultural momentum faded, as the audience moved on to newer content and newer drama, that revenue stream began to dry up too. What Toni has been left with is a gap between the life her image requires, the diva presentation, the luxury aesthetic, the standards she has maintained publicly for 30 years, and the actual income available to fund that life. This is the context inside which the Birdman chapter has to be understood. Because the specific timing of Toni's reemergence in his orbit, appearing in 2023 after 4 years of distance, right around the period when industry insiders were saying she was approaching a third bankruptcy, is not timing that reads as romantic coincidence. It reads as a woman who ran the numbers and made a decision. Birdman's net worth is estimated at approximately $160 million. The amount Toni allegedly demanded in the divorce was $160 million. She was married to him for 48 hours. If those numbers are accurate, and they have been reported by enough outlets with enough consistency to be taken seriously, then what Toni allegedly attempted was not a division of marital assets. It was an attempt to transfer his entire fortune to herself in exchange for 2 days of marriage. That is not a settlement. That is an invoice. Birdman is saying as much behind the scenes. Sources close to him describe a man who feels used in the most specific and calculated way, not by someone who loved him and then fell out of love, but by someone who arrived back in his life with a plan already formed. He is telling people she played him, that the reconciliation was manufactured, that the wedding was a mechanism rather than a milestone, and the story of the missing ring, the $5 million diamond that allegedly went from her finger to a pawn shop, fits into that narrative with a specificity that makes it hard to dismiss as unrelated. Because if Toni was willing to sell an engagement ring to cover her debts once, the question of what she was willing to do to access an entire fortune is not an unreasonable one to ask. What Toni says publicly about all of this is carefully managed. She has dismissed the $160 million figure in interviews with a laugh and a deflection that is practiced enough to land smoothly but vague enough to confirm nothing. She has spoken about her happiness, her comfort in her own skin, her settled love life, characterizations that she offered in an interview setting with the same easy confidence of a woman who knows how to control a room. She said she is the happiest she has been in a long time, that she is comfortable in her decisions. But there is a gap between the composure and the reality that is hard to close entirely. Because the reality is a woman with 2 bankruptcies in her past, album sales that have collapsed to a fraction of their former performance, a reality television platform that is no longer generating the cultural energy it once did, and a 48-hour marriage to one of the wealthiest figures in hip-hop, followed immediately by a demand for his entire net worth. Birdman is not a sympathetic figure in the conventional sense. He has his own complicated history, his own allegations attached to his name, his own reasons for the public to approach his version of events with skepticism. The fact that he feels wronged does not automatically mean he is right about everything, and the possibility that this was simply a relationship that collapsed under the weight of its own complications, that 2 difficult people tried to build something that was never structurally sound, cannot be entirely dismissed. But the specific details are hard to explain away through any narrative other than the one Birdman is now telling. The ring that was allegedly pawned. The 4-year absence followed by a strategically timed return. The wedding date that preceded a filing by 48 hours. The divorce demand that matched his net worth to the dollar. These are not the artifacts of a love story that simply did not work. They are the artifacts of something more calculated, more patient, more deliberate. Toni Braxton built a career on vulnerability, on songs about heartbreak and loss, and the specific ache of being left by someone you loved completely. That emotional authenticity is real. She has described real stories behind her biggest records in enough interviews, with enough specific detail, to make clear that the pain in that music came from genuine experience. She is not performing when she sings about heartbreak. She has lived it. But the woman who sings about heartbreak and the woman who allegedly showed up at Birdman's door in 2023 with a plan already running in the background, those 2 women can coexist. People are complicated enough to be both things at once. To be genuinely capable of love and simultaneously desperate enough for financial security to make choices that betray the people who offer it. Whether that is what happened with Birdman is the question the courts and the public are both in the process of answering. What is already clear is that the story Birdman is telling has enough documented detail behind it. The bankruptcies, the timeline, the ring, the 48-hour marriage, the $160 million demand, to make the alternative explanation requires significantly more work to construct. And Toni Braxton, who has been through enough of these public accountability moments to know exactly how they operate, is navigating this one with the same composure she brought to the Oprah interview and the same deflection she offered when things got uncomfortable then. The difference is that this time the person pressing the question is not a talk show host. It is the documented record of her own decisions laid next to each other in sequence. That record is doing the talking now, and it is not telling a love story. There is a version of Toni Braxton that her most devoted fans will always protect. The version that has been through genuine hardship, that has fought real health battles, that has been underpaid and undervalued by an industry that extracted from her talent without adequately compensating it. That version is documented and real. The contractual disputes that contributed to her first bankruptcy were not invented. The lupus diagnosis that complicated her second professional comeback was not a fabrication. She has endured things that most people in the entertainment industry do not have to endure, and she has done it largely without losing the public's affection. But protection and accountability are not mutually exclusive. You can acknowledge everything Toni Braxton has been through and still hold the specific sequence of events around Birdman up to the light and ask uncomfortable questions. Because the people who are most invested in her image, who want the story to be about a woman navigating late-life love with the same honesty she brings to her music, are the same people who have to account for why she chose this specific man, at this specific time, in this specific financial context, and why the outcome looks the way it looks. Birdman is not an accident. He is not a random person Toni stumbled into after years of keeping her personal life private. He is one of the wealthiest figures in hip-hop, a man whose money is as visible as his personality, whose financial empire has been part of his public identity for decades. Toni has known him for 25 years. She knows exactly what his net worth looks like. She knows the difference between the life he lives and the life her current income can support. And she came back to him in 2023, after 4 years of public separation, after enough time had passed that a return required a deliberate choice rather than a drift, in circumstances that multiple people in her orbit have described as financially pressing. The idea that those two facts are unrelated requires a specific kind of faith in coincidence that most people watching this situation do not appear to have. What makes this particular story cut deeper than the average celebrity money dispute is the emotional dimension underneath it. Because if Birdman's account is accurate, Toni did not simply try to access his wealth through legal mechanisms. She spent months rebuilding an emotional connection with him. She reminded him of a 25-year friendship. She made him feel something real enough to override his better judgment and walk back into a relationship he had already walked out of. And then she used that emotional access as the vehicle for a financial strategy. That is a different category of betrayal than a bad prenuptial agreement or a contested divorce settlement. That is someone using intimacy as a tool, using another person's feelings as leverage, letting them love you or let themselves be loved by you, in service of an outcome that was never about the love itself. Whether that is exactly what happened is something the courts will continue to work through. But the pattern, the return at a financially convenient moment, the wedding with no prenuptial protection that Birdman apparently did not secure, the immediate filing, the demand calibrated precisely to his net worth, tells a story that is difficult to read any other way without torturing the logic of coincidence beyond what it can bear. 50 Cent weighed in on the situation with his signature combination of humor and pointed observation, making a joke about the duration of the marriage that spread across social media faster than any formal reporting. The internet found it funny. But underneath the laugh was the same question everyone was already asking. What exactly was the transaction here, and who understood its terms before the ceremony, and who did not? Birdman is increasingly clear that he believes he was the one who did not understand, that he was operating inside a relationship while Toni was operating inside a strategy. And his decision to stop being quiet about it, to move from cryptic comments to something approaching direct accusation, suggests a man who has moved past the phase of hoping the situation resolves quietly and is now invested in making sure the record reflects what he believes actually happened. Whether the full story ever becomes fully public is uncertain. Legal proceedings have a way of keeping their most damaging details behind confidentiality agreements and sealed filings. But enough has already surfaced, through reporting, through the documented timeline, through the specific numbers, that the outline of the situation is visible even if every detail is not yet confirmed. And that outline is not flattering to Toni Braxton. Not the woman, not the artist, not the icon, the person who made the choices that produced this specific sequence of events. She is talented enough to have built a legacy that outlasted her financial crises. She is resilient enough to have come back from 2 bankruptcies and a health diagnosis that would have ended lesser careers. She is capable of the kind of genuine emotional honesty that makes her music still resonate with people who were not alive when she recorded it. None of that changes what the timeline shows. And the timeline shows a 48-hour marriage, a $160 million demand, and a missing $5 million ring that was allegedly sold for reasons that were never fully explained. Those are the facts sitting at the center of this story regardless of how it ultimately resolves. So here is where this lands. Birdman is saying Toni came back for the money, married him for 48 hours, demanded $160 million in the divorce, and allegedly tried to flip his jewelry when the courts did not cooperate. Toni is saying she is happy and settled, and the rumors are not worth addressing with specificity. And in between those two positions sits a documented history of financial collapse, a mysteriously vanished $5 million ring, and a marriage so short it did not outlast a long weekend. Do you think Birdman got played? Or is he a man rewriting a story to protect his ego after a relationship he chose to re-enter? And does Toni's financial history make the timing of this reconciliation look calculated to you? Or is that reading too much into circumstances that might just be coincidence? Drop everything you are thinking in the comments. Both sides of this have people talking loud and neither one is clean. Hit that like and subscribe, because this one is nowhere near settled. And if Birdman decides to really put everything on record, we are going to be here for every single word of it.